He's done such an excellent job at making sure that he's stirred the pot with his followers and making sure that they too feel that they are victims and that they should also live in fear if President Trump is not the one in charge. And so, you have this brainwashing of a whole entire voting bloc that truly believe that this man is the answer. End of story.
Rachel and Nadine, let's say hi to Amy Tarkanian now, who's a former chair of the Republican Party in the state of Nevada and joins us on the line from there now. Amy, welcome back to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to have you here. Amy, about this Colorado ruling, what do you make of it? I know you're no great fan of Donald Trump. You are a Republican. Was the verdict, in your judgment, was it fair? Was it just?
Well, I do think, unfortunately, that it's going to backfire, and it does seem to have some pretty heavy political ill will. And it's unfortunate because I do believe in the end, you're going to have the Supreme Court, once it's appealed by the Trump administration or the Trump team, that they're going to overturn it. Because now the question is what I'm hearing from legal scholars, your co-host just mentioned, he has not been convicted of being an insurrectionist. So we're going to be doing a little bit of wordplay, I guess, with the way that the 14th Amendment is laid out in the third section of, what exactly can he get away with? Is there wiggle room? Because there are people who are definitely hell-bent, including President Biden, who do believe that he had a major part in the insurrection on January 6th. But once again, he hasn't been convicted.
Right,
so it's going to be up to wordplay.
Let's just make this clear for our listeners. We're talking about the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, Part 3, which was put in place after the American Civil War. And what it said and what it was meant to do was to stop people who were involved in insurrection taking office in America. And it explicitly covers officials, and it covers elected Americans in Congress. It doesn't explicitly say a president. And the Colorado judges said, look, if it doesn't cover a president, then surely the whole thing is a nonsense. Of course they meant it to cover presidents. But there's another issue there which you make there, Amy, which is insurrection. I mean, he has not been found guilty in any court of insurrection. There was an impeachment hearing on Capitol Hill in Washington with a mound of evidence about the riots on Capitol Hill and Donald Trump's part in that. But the impeachment did not succeed, and there has been no conviction for insurrection, although there are court cases touching on that, including in Washington, D.C. Now, the Colorado judges, Amy, they knew all that, and yet they still found that Trump should be barred from taking part in the race for the White House. How do we explain that? What did the judges decide to overcome that obstacle?
Sure. Well, the makeup of the Colorado Supreme Court is actually, because the vote went 4-3. And from what I understand, of course, you're supposed to be nonpartisan when you are sitting on the bench. But from what I understand, all 7 judges typically are registered Democrats. And I do believe also that some of them are up for re-election, which I find to be interesting. So, is some of this actually, like I mentioned, political ill will? Is it because of the uprising of the people? Is it because they want to start it to steamroll and actually catch fire in other judicial systems across the nation? Because it has failed in a couple of others. But, are they just trying to get the ball rolling? It's very hard to tell.
And we wonder whether it's open to the Supreme Court to uphold the Colorado judgment, given that Trump has not been convicted, hands down for insurrection. What are you thinking about this, Nadine?
I think you're right in suggesting that it could backfire because, one of the kind of rallying calls that a lot of Trump supporters say is that there's a plot against Trump and they're trying to bring him down. Now, as has been pointed out, he hasn't been convicted of insurrection. In the court of public opinion, I'd say both in the UK, certainly, I think the general kind of sense is the people that stormed the Capitol on that day, and we all watched completely shocked as the scenes kind of beamed around the world. They were clearly, many people felt it was motivated by Trump. But fundamentally, if you're going to go into the legality of it, if he's not been convicted of it, it does seem that it's going to be wide open to legal challenges and risks fueling this kind of, the idea that Trump has been wronged or there's an establishment trying to move against him. It really does feed that narrative that Trump builds, whether it's there or not, that this just provides a kind of, he will say, evidence of that. Now, the judges may feel that, it was insurrection, it passed whatever legal thresholds they have. I'm not an expert on the kind of constitutional law of Colorado, but, they may feel that way. But ultimately, if it is overturned, it does give Trump that fire that he kind of, add fuel to that fire that he just loves building on, of this idea he's the most persecuted president in American history, as he likes to kind of keep repeating.
Yeah, Amy, I mean, in the end, this is going to come down to the justices of the Supreme Court. It's not going to come down to American voters. It's certainly not going to come down to us sitting here in London. But as a Republican, someone who doesn't have a particularly devoted notion of Donald Trump, is it your view that he was engaged in insurrection on that terrible day? Is that established in your mind from what you've seen and heard and thought?
I was incredibly upset on that day. In fact, now that we have social media, there's ways to go back and see how people truly felt at that snapshot of a moment. And if you go back and look at my Twitter feed, I was enraged. I was disgusted. I was so sad. I wanted President Trump to actually speak up boldly and immediately. And none of that was happening. And we were just watching, as you mentioned, you watched it as well. So you had the entire world, not just the United States of America, the entire world watching the Capitol, the People's House, being bombarded with violence, and it was so terrifying. I just know that I was talking to my friends that day, and they didn't know. They were in shock. Some of them were in tears because they were in shock. Some of them were angry. Most people were just confused as to why wasn't this being stopped.
And Amy, I want to bring Rachel in, but you made the point at the very beginning. The MAGA caucus, his most devoted following, they're just going to rally more strongly to his side in the light of this Colorado ruling, because everything that's thrown at them just reaffirms them in their view that he's the victim of a Democrat establishment left-wing liberal conspiracy. Amy.
Oh, yes, 100%. In fact, this is just going to further embolden his base, and it's going to solidify his martyr status, if you will. And so, he's done such an excellent job at making sure that he's stirred the pot with his followers and making sure that they, too, feel that they are victims and that they should also live in fear if President Trump is not the one in charge. And so, you have this brainwashing of a whole entire voting bloc that truly believe that this man is the answer. End of story.
Yeah, Rachel.
I think that comment there about martyr status is a really interesting one. I remember on this show a couple of weeks ago, we were talking to a lawyer who actually suggested on air to us that even if Donald Trump had committed crimes, maybe it was not in the best interest of the nation to prosecute him for that, because his base clearly feel very strongly that he is being persecuted and it could backfire, and that actually he should be treated differently in the law because of that status, which I remember thinking is quite a remarkable thing to say. But in terms of how the Republican Party reacts to this, I'd be really interested in Amy's thoughts. We heard in those clips earlier, one Republican nominee, I'm not entirely sure who it was, say that he would take his name off the ballot in Colorado, and encouraging fellow Republicans to do the same. And I wonder if that is something, if Donald Trump is not allowed to stand in Colorado, it's sort of in protest, and I wonder if that's something that looks likely. Will the Republican Party, including his rivals, rally around in his defence, or will they use this as an opportunity to further their own campaigns?
What do you think, Amy?
First of all, I'm not a fan of Vivek Ramaswamy at all, by any means. I think he is obnoxious and he's a showman. And so, I think he's hoping that he can be Trump's VP, even though he claims that's not the case. And so when you hear somebody come out so strongly saying that he not only is suggesting, but that he demands that these other candidates remove themselves, who does he think he is? Everyone's running a campaign to win, not to lose. And you have somebody like Governor Chris Christie, who I believe came out with the right response. And even though he is an opponent of Donald Trump's, and he's been very clear that he's no fan of Donald Trump, he's questioning the validity of this ruling. And I think that's fair. That's a fair question to put out there. But by all means, you can't just demand that everyone's going to drop what they're doing and go about their business. because of what happened to one individual. I think it's good to question, though, but I disagree with Vivek wholeheartedly.
Amy, as always, it's really good to get your thoughts. Hopefully we can talk again soon. We're going to be talking about this story again. We're going to be watching the American election more and more closely, more and more often. We will be calling you again. Amy Tarkanian, the former chair of the Republican Party in the state of Nevada. Thank you.